through to the next level. Because after you have lived through it, make sure you learned from it. Did you hear what I just said? After you have lived through it, make sure you have learned from it. Make sure you allowed God to show you what you needed to know in the midst of what you went through. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. See, I lived through the valley. But the reason I lived through the valley was because I learned in the valley. For thou art with me. What I learned in the valley is that when tears are in my eyes, he's still here. Pain in your heart, he's still here. And what you learn in the valley is that God is not just present in your mountaintops. God is present in the lowest plains of your life. I wish you would look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, I'm more than a survivor. I'm more than an overcomer. Truth be told, I'm more than a conqueror. Yea, in all these things. Oh God, look at your neighbor and tell your neighbor, I am persuaded that nothing is going to separate me from the love of God. What I learned in what I went through is that nothing I went through would change his love for me. I learned that if he had to get down into the pit, take the heat out the flame, the appetite out the lion, whatever he had to do to bring me out, because he loves you, he will bring you out. Be seated for a second. Let's try to work a little while. It's all right to go through. But the difference between being bitter and better is learning. Let me say that again. The difference between being bitter and being better is what you learn. It's what you learn that determines. See, if you go through a trial and get a wrong interpretation, it will have you bitter at God for the rest of your life. That's right. That's right. You'll be bitter towards people for the rest of your life. And bitterness will short circuit your blessings. You can't be fully blessed and bitter. You have to determine, somehow, God, I have to overcome this. And I want to overcome by the wisdom you give me. Sometimes the wisdom simply is, you made your share of mistakes, but the fact of the matter is people still had to make their choices. Sometimes you look at your life and you say, God, I didn't do anything to them on that job, and why they treat me like this? Because sometimes at the end of the day, people have to make their own decisions. And sometimes wisdom is just, I've made bad decisions, you make bad decisions, and sometimes you just got to accept the fact that people are not going to do what you think they ought to do. You've been looking for a deep meaning and a deep reason for why it happened. It ain't the devil. It's people decided to do what they wanted to do and the devil used them. Is that we're frail and all of us do foolish stuff sometimes. If every testimony you share has you as the victim, you're not telling the truth. If you're the hero in every one of your testimonies, you ain't telling the whole truth. Because you may have been a victim before, but you have been a villain also. Y'all better help me preach in here. Oh, you better help me preach in this place. And the way you learn how to forgive other folk is to forgive the villain that's still resident in you. I wish I had somebody to help me preach here. Come on, sometimes you got to just accept the fact that you may be the one bleeding this season, but you were the one who caused the blood for somebody else in the last season. Y'all better help the preacher preaching here. And you could get up a whole lot faster if you could ever admit that I'm wrong sometimes too. You could overcome some stuff and you would just say it ain't nobody's fault but mine. Come on, on, every now and then, if you could just admit, I shouldn't have said that, shouldn't have done that, shouldn't have went there, shouldn't have said this, shouldn't have been around that. The sooner you can open your mouth and acknowledge the fact, God, this is my fault right here. This is my bad. Well, they did it, I let them. It's my fault. And the moment you take responsibility, God will begin the process of recovery in your life. Because sometimes you got to recover from what you went through. And you can't recover until you find the great physician walking into the emergency room of your circumstance and say, God, is not them. I'm here. Treat me, doctor. Give me the prescription I need for the condition I'm in. Sometimes you got to look back on the last season and say, they did it, but they ain't here to deal with the collateral damages. I'm the one got to deal with what happened. I got a choice to make now. Will I spend my life hoping they pay for what they did? Or will I say, doctor, here I am, standing in the need of prayer. They may have lied on you, but they gone on about their business. You got to heal from the lie. I feel like shouting here now. Look at your neighbor, say, neighbor, I'm the one who's got to deal with what happened. And I can't spend my life arguing with people who are no longer present to defend themselves. I got to go ahead and stand up and say, God, they put me in the pit, sold me to the Ishmaelites, and now I'm in Egypt. I didn't ask to be here. I didn't request to be here. I didn't buy a ticket to get here, but I'm here. And since I'm here and I'm in your hand, what do you want to do with the season I'm in? I didn't ask nobody to pick me up in a chariot and bring me down here, but since I'm here, I don't have time for a pity party. I was a dreamer in my daddy's house. I'll be a dreamer in Potiphar's house. Now that pain has positioned me here, what's the purpose for my positioning? Be seated for a second. Y'all excuse me. I didn't mean to preach that hard, but I feel it in my bones. You can ask yourself, you can waste your years trying to figure out how you got here. How did I get here? You can spend all your time trying to figure, well, maybe if I didn't make that mistake. Dwelling on shoulda, coulda, wouldas. Or you can say, what did I learn while I was at my daddy's house? And not only what did I learn there, but what can I learn here? Because the difficulty, and I feel Joseph, I feel him because you didn't ask to be at Potiphar's house. You just told your brothers what your dream was. We start looking for platforms. We should look for property. Because it is the problem you solve that becomes the platform for God to be seen. Pharaoh has a problem. He can't interpret the dream. And so Joseph's gift makes room for him. Because the butler remembers when I was in prison, there was a man in prison with me. And I came out, but he stayed in. Sometimes you will have to be faithful to God while other people are getting out and you still feel locked in. Sometimes you can be like, God, I've done everything you told me to do. I said everything. I've been faithful. I've been in prayer. I've been doing all of this. And how did they get out and I stay in? But watch this. Instead of trying to defend yourself and fight, leave your times in the hand of God and just trust that God knows when the right time is to bring me forward. He knows the right time to give me the opportunity. And so the butler says, hold on, I remember this guy. So they called Joseph, and when they called him, remember I told you a couple things he did was he cut his hair and he changed his clothes because he knew he couldn't go into his future looking like his past. I'm trying to preach fast, y'all. I'm really trying to preach fast. I'm trying to just help somebody and say sometimes you got to change it up because God is trying to promote you to the palace, but you're still looking like you were in prison. The look on your face says you're still in a trial, but he done brought you out. Weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. I could understand tears on your face if it was nighttime, but look out the window, baby. The sun is up. You are not in the last season you were in. You ought to have a joy ringing in your soul, flooding from your face that said, listen, everything's not like I want it to be, man, but God has brought me out of the stuff that I was in. Are you ever going to pause and tell him thank you? Are you ever going to turn around and say, God, I bless you? Because sometimes I believe we miss the opportunity for praise because we get so caught up in what we're going through, we miss when we get out. He had to be ready because preparation can take years, but moments of destiny doors can be opened in a moment. You can come out in a moment. It don't take God long to change it. Don't get too comfortable in your confinement because God could change it in a moment. Don't get too comfortable in sadness because God could change it in a moment. And you don't want to be trying to force yourself back into something he's trying to get you out of. Yeah. So he comes before Pharaoh, clean cut, new clothes. And Pharaoh says, can you interpret the dream? He said, I heard you can interpret. Watch what Joseph says. Joseph says, it's not in me to interpret the dream. Because real dreamers know the dream has to come from God. God can't trust you if you take his glory. Listen, man. God says, I know you're gifted. And I know you're a dream. But Joseph said, let it be known. The only way I ever get interpretation is because I talk to God. Joseph is in the marketplace. Joseph is in the palace. Joseph is operating in government and in business. And you know what we do when we get in those environments? We get afraid of our faith. I'm about to come down your street now. Let me slow down too. I ain't going to drive through in a car. I'm coming on a bike. Yeah. Real slow bike too with bells on. Come down your street. Listen. Listen. We get in those environments and we don't want to mention his name. Because we don't want to be a holy roller. I think I'm going to preach a message next year called Holy Rollers. I am Holy Rollers. Holy Rollers. Because we get so afraid of saying, God told me. We get so afraid to say the word of God says because we don't want to be controversial and we don't want to offend anybody. And the only person that we're afraid, that we're not afraid to offend is God. We don't want to offend anybody, but if God gets offended, we never think about whether or not God got offended, but we say whatever. But when Joseph got there, he said, yes, my resume says I interpret dreams, but let it be known that there is a dream giver who is speaking to me. And behind my gift is a God who has made me who I am. Look at your neighbor, say, God is behind the gift. So watch this. He interprets the dream. He says, you're going to have 7 years of plenty. You're going to have 7 years of famine. 7 years of plenty, then you're going to have 7 years of famine. He says, but here's what we do. Now watch this. He asked for the interpretation. He got an interpretation and a strategy. People that excel are those who are able to do more than they're asked. Asked you to interpret a dream. God gave you not only the interpretation, but he gave you a strategy. He said, here's what the dream means. He could have stopped. He had done his job. But the wisdom of God, I believe it was the gift of wisdom, gift of word of wisdom. Word of wisdom came to him and said, tell him, here's what they do. During the 7 years of plenty, don't eat up all the food. Live off of 80%. He says 1/5. 1/5 is what? That's 20%. It leaves. So he says take 1/5, take 20% and save it. 20% of all you get during the years of plenty, stop eating up your harvest. Look at your neighbor, say, save something. Look at your neighbor, say, do you want to prosper next year? Do you want to have more money by the end of next year than you had this year? Oh, I got a word for you. I got a prophetic word for you. Save something. Save something. Why does this matter? Why does this matter? Why does this matter? This, because in the church we get very religious. It's so, I've preached about all kinds of stuff. I've preached about deliverance. We had 7 doors up here talking about deliverance. You talk about people in the marketplace, money, people like, oh, they just preach about money. You forgot